So this is actually really common in codependent relationships, right? So a lot of times codependent relationships, so for example, you might have it take place, let's use the example, somebody with a mental illness and somebody without a mental illness. They get into a relationship. Normally, let's just assume normal process by which they get into a relationship. And a codependent starts because the mentally ill person really struggles all the time. And in her case, the person with a stalker and like safety issues, she maybe has anxiety, I'm not really sure. And the other person takes up the mantle of like being the savior. They're the ones who's going to help them. There is so many relationships that I know where the dynamic begins to develop over time, where one person is always saving the other person. And this type of relationship is necessarily poised to become toxic and unhealthy. It becomes toxic and unhealthy in typically different ways. And just because it becomes toxic and unhealthy, it doesn't mean that it can't be corrected and made healthy again, right? There has been times in Nick and I's relationship where I would say like we were codependent, like me more toward him. And we've also moved to a healthier state. But typically in a codependent relationship, you have one person almost entirely leaning on the other. Now, this does two things. Number one, it actually erodes the confidence of the codependent person. Because if you think about it, if you are the codependent person, it feels really good to have somebody who takes care of you. It feels really comforting. It feels good to be seen and for your pain to be taken seriously. And the issue is that a lot of times when the codependence starts, it's healthy because people who are really struggling need a community around them, and this person represents a community who actually like supports them, and that helps them initially. They get happier, they get less depression, less anxiety, they start doing things more. Their person that they're relying on helps pull them out. However, over time, as this dynamic continues, the foundation of what that person views as their way that they problem solve becomes intrinsically linked to their partner, the person that they're codependent on. And this can create a type of situation where the person, when they don't have access to that person, or just in general, their sense of identity really erodes. So in therapy, there's actually something that we do very intentionally, because in therapy, one of the worst things that can happen, I won't give you all the technical jargon because there's a technical word for when like your client becomes to rely on you too much and you take on that role. But in therapy, part of the boundaries that are really important in the relationship that we try to erect is to ensure that the client is doing as much work as the therapist. So like typically when I would do addiction counseling and I would take on clients, I would say to them, we both are running this race together and I want to help you. I'm going to help pick you up, but I can't drag you past the finish line. It has to be you that does the steps. It has to be you that walks through this. I'm here for you to lean on when you need it, but I will never drag you through the finish line. Yes, Angel, thank you. In a codependent relationship, the partner doesn't know to do this. And so what it starts out is well-meaning, wanting to help. Oftentimes it's going to be one person who's struggling and the other person who probably has been in the help role a lot throughout their life, childhood stuff. Or they've got a bit of a martyr syndrome where they tend to like try to help others at the cost of themselves, right? All sorts of these sort of things. However, over time, the codependent person's actual emotional regulation system becomes fundamentally reliant on their partner, on partner A, on their dependent. I said they're independent. I hate this. I need words for this. Partner A, partner B. Okay, they come reliant on partner B to the point that they don't have a sense of identity, a very well-formed one. I'm just going to use a paint. You guys, I don't need to do a paint. You guys are understanding. And so what happens over time as well is we understand what happens to the codependent person. They often become more anxious over time. They often become less capable of self-determination. They tend to build an external locus of control. So they start to see their ability to control their surroundings as very external to themselves. And we don't think a lot about what happens to the other partner, right? What happens to the other partner is at some point something blows up, their relationship fails, and they oftentimes become an asshole. So I'm just going to draw this out, okay? A, B, so we can see it more easily. Okay, we got A, we got B, okay? And the relationship looks like this, okay? So B is codependent. B is constantly relying on A. And what you need to understand is that over time, the like structures of B's sense of identity, self-regulation, it all becomes increasingly reliant on A. Now, as you can imagine, this is not a super fun place to be for A for very long, even though A is just as much as fault as B for getting into that dynamic because they have enabled the relationship to look like this. And so in codependence, what often happens is that A begins to have some sort of dysfunctional, oftentimes unfair behavior towards person B. And this can look in a myriad of ways. Sometimes what it will look like is stonewalling, right? So they'll just kind of start icing out their partner. They won't talk to them. They'll ignore them more often. And in large part, it's because B has become such an emotional burden, and it's constant and it's chronic and they can never predict it, that A has developed a large aversion system to their partner. They're like, ugh, I really don't want to be around them. I don't want to have to deal with it. But it's their partner, so they're going to feel bad. So another thing that we will commonly see that will develop is they will stonewall. They also become very controlling, right? Not just of partner B, but also of the environment around partner B. So not only are they going to be controlling of B, and usually it starts in a good way where they're like, well, you said you have anxiety and that you need to take your meds, so remember to take your meds. And they're like, oh, thank you, I appreciate that. Or they'll be like, hey, you say that you have an eating disorder. It's really important that you eat, so I made you some food you need to eat. So it starts oftentimes in like a care style of control. But over time, because it initially is helpful and then becomes expected, right? Because B will begin to expect it, right? Because if B's regulation system is now intrinsically tied to A, right? B, let's like say B is on a stool, okay, of life. And half of the legs are built on A. If B is like here, okay, he's sitting on a stool and it's like A is here, A's holding them up here, and maybe they're holding themselves up here. Well, now the codependent isn't just relying on A. They expect A to be there. A has fundamentally consented and agreed to that dynamic. And now B is going to be upset when the person they're codependent on doesn't show up for them in the way that they want them to, which is why when people are like, Emmy Rue's not perfect. Yeah, of course she's not perfect. She ended up in a codependent relationship. Nobody's fucking, just a pro tip. Just a really fast pro tip. Nobody's perfect, literally ever. But that doesn't mean things are equal, right? Both partners can fuck up and one partner can still be more toxic, right? This is obviously true. So you've got controlling. They're going to start controlling things that B does, in part because things that B does might trigger their anxiety, which causes B to be expectant of emotional support from A. So A starts preempting all of the things that could trigger B to prevent B from getting triggered so that they don't have to care about it and they don't have to carry it, okay?